Hello everyone, and welcome back to another theory about Limbus Company. I wanted to share something I've realized recently, specifically about the sinners and the Sephirah. You see, we've already gotten very clear parallels between Ryoshu and Gregor, but recently I was wondering what would happen if it went beyond that. So I thought over what information we have currently, and something really stuck out to me. There's a surprising amount of evidence connecting the sinners to the Sephirah, from their behavior to their mannerisms to the point where it's too much to ignore. I want to try and organize my thoughts on why this could be happening and what it teaches about not only the sinners, but the story's general direction moving forward. I'll be dividing this video into 4 sections with some subsections in between. The first 3 will be about the sinner's connections to the Sephirah, with each subsection relating to my certainty on who's connected to who. The 4th will be about what it means and how this changes how we should think about the game. So, without further ado, let's get started. This one's a complete no-brainer. Not only has she had several nods to the Red Mist, but in her lobotomy Outis story, Carmen directly compares her with Gregor, not to mention her violent tendencies, general lack of care, and undeniable power. I'm just going to move on, this one's way too obvious. This comparison might sound a bit strange at first, especially as the second most obvious one, but let me ask you something. What's something about Honglu's sprites that none of the other sinners have? It might be a bit hard to remember, but after searching through every sprite of his and every art of his, you'll realize, oh, wait, he has no negative expressions. It makes sense considering his general attitude towards everything, but it's even weirder when you think about the PM universe's general darker tones. Now, where have I seen that before? Oh wait, Malka doesn't have any negative emotion sprites either, in Lobotomy Corp at least. I think with a similarity that specific, it's safe to say that they're linked. Before I explain its case, I want to make something clear. There aren't exactly enough Sephirah to fill every sinner, so naturally some of these may be stretches. But I'm still doing the best I can. And don't worry, I still have plenty of evidence regardless. Anyway, Heathcliff has lots of connections to Roland, from his Black Silence mirror world to his boohoo dead wife, and his general demeanor. The whole Black Silence thing would be the nail in the coffin for me, but there is someone else with the Black Silence mirror world in Leviathan, and though it did tell us a lot about the mirror worlds, I still believe it's reasonable that Heathcliff connects to Roland. This may seem like a bit of a weird comparison, but trust me, it makes sense. I think a good place to start for this one is to rule out who's not Yesod. Your first guess here was probably Meursault, but let me explain why that's wrong. Meursault, though very objective, more so does that out of apathy, while Yesod has been shown to care about others but simply uses cold-blooded personality as a mask. Meanwhile, Meursault has had no real relationships with the other sinners, and simply does as he's told. Outis has the exact opposite problem as Meursault, as she cares far too much to be a realistic stand-in. That leaves Faust as the last other possibility. But she's far different from Yesod, being generally distant from the team as a whole. Now that's taken care of, allow me to explain why Ishmael makes sense in the first place. As you may recall, up to around the middle of Canto 2, Ishmael was very respectful towards Dante, trying to help them adjust and being a generally objective and trustworthy ally. However, she flipped right after, being cold and distant towards everyone due to a perceived lack of intelligence and maturity. This, in my eyes, is the main thing that cements her in as Yesod, as, though she doesn't exactly have similar problems in a trauma sense, she is uncannily similar in terms of demeanor and personality. This is where we start to get into more speculative territory. Some of these aren't that obvious, but generally make sense. Expect ones here that you probably wouldn't instantly make the connections for, but make sense when you think about it. Considering how I just explained how he's not Meursault, this one's pretty easy to explain. Benat is very objective and seems to just do what intrigues her, as shown with Andrew's betrayal. This fits Meursault to a T and generally just makes the most sense for him. This is probably one of the more interesting comparisons, at least from a lore perspective. Don Quixote and Hodge share several traits from the get-go, such as their desire to make others' lives better and misguided methods of doing so. What really acts as the last nail in the coffin, though, is Hode's backstory. If you recall, back when the Lobotomy Corporation was in the outskirts, Hode had snitched to the head about what was happening out of fear, and as a result, nearly everyone involved died. This would fit with Don's general impulsiveness and her actions back in Canto 3, where Dante remarks that, even if she hadn't broken the glass to protect the parent and child from separation, another sinner would have likely stepped in. Also, though this video has been made very shortly before the release of Canto 7, I think it could be predicted that she possibly did something to anger the Blood Fiends, possibly adjacent to Hode's betrayal that resulted in her exile. This is another one that's quite interesting and seems more and more likely as you go deeper. Let's start with the obvious though. Outis has shown very clear intentions to betray the sinners, from her sucking up to Dante to being incredibly rude to everyone else. Nearly everything about her points to betrayal. That's not even mention how she already has a major dynamic between 3 people in her story. Though, to be fair, that isn't an isolated incident in any way, shape, or form. Sinclair has shown a lot of similarities to Tiphrith over time, and though they're subtle, I think it's enough to where I'd say they're one of the last easy connections. For starters, let's look at his relationship with Demian. They both care deeply about each other. Sinclair sees Demian as a sort of guiding light, and one day he's suddenly separated from him. Meanwhile, as for Cromer, she wanted everyone to fit with her version of humanity and manipulated Sinclair to the point where she could enact a genocide across Sinclair's village just to get rid of those prosthetics. Meanwhile, with Tiphrith, she was with Enoch for most of her life, before she suddenly lost him due to the Cogito experiment. She blamed Carmen for his death and never truly forgave her. There's a lot of connections right off the bat. Mainly, Demian seems to be connected to Enoch and Cromer to Carmen, not to mention them both having the youngest appearance out of their respective groups. This is more of the part where it gets into speculative territory. The ones in here are mostly chosen by process of elimination and don't seem to have that much in common. Well, except one. I was debating whether to put Sinclair or Rodion in this area, but considering how much evidence we have about Sinclair's connection, she had to go here. Regardless, I do believe I still have a solid case for her. For starters, the most obvious similarity is that they both mask for the sake of others. Chesed is nice to his employees as a way of coping with his reality while ensuring the welfare of his team, while Rodion masks for the sake of keeping others happy and not having them worry about her. You can also connect them through how Benat forced Chesed to open the containment units under the idea that some people could escape with their lives. Meanwhile, Rodion killed a member of the Middle for the sake of her town, which got everyone killed. They also share shockingly similar speech patterns, down to their excessive use of tildes. This might also seem like an obvious decision to make, but trust me, it wasn't. Sure, Faust can connect to several mirror worlds of herself, and Ian has multiple versions of himself, but that's about it. They're both rather objective, but Faust has consistently shown herself to be generally friendlier and more sympathetic than Ian ever was. With that being said, even though it is a major connection, it's the only real connection I can think of at this point, though I'm sure that'll change in the future. Here's a really interesting one. Now, you might be wondering, why, out of all the sinners, I'm combining these two? Well, they're extremely difficult to pin down. Let's look at this step by step. First, their connections to Meursault. They both share similar traits to him, though Gregor is much more sociable, while Yusong is less emotional. Gregor does have damage from experimentation though, but that alone can't decide everything. So let's look at this deeper. Now, as for their connections to Hogma, for starters, both of their kantos have very heavy connections to the past. Gregor's takes place in what is basically one giant PTSD hallucination, and Yusong's is focused on him coming to terms with his past and moving forward. I think you can probably understand why this is so hard for me to pin down, but I realized something that might help narrow it down, assuming a prediction of mine comes true. You see, in Kanto 6, Dante gains his first sapling of light ability, Pagrita, which is based off of Hogma, and the Floor of Religion. And, well, if we get Chessett's next, which would mean that Rodion is based off of him, it would confirm both of him as Hogma and my theory is true. I'm really hoping that's what'll happen, but this video is coming out a few days before we even get the first batch of Kanto 7, so I'm really hoping for the best here. Overall, this has some really deep implications on how we should view Limbus and its lore, because if we assume this is true, it would really change everything. We could predict the events of the next Kantos, find the secrets of the sinners before we're even meant to know them, and maybe even find the reason why we're here in the first place. And with all that, I'm happy to say thank you for watching. This video took a good bit longer than I expected it to, but I'm glad it ended up the way it did. Feel free to discuss any theories in the comments. In the meantime, I'll see you later.